No.
Have you read the one about the Sleeping Beauty?
In old Hollywood, a child's face could finance an empire. The child worked. The adults held the money. And when that kid finally asked, "Where is what I earned?" the answer was often the same: spent, drained, or taken long before adulthood arrived.
When I started out, I was about 3 years old, and I worked for a year and a half as a starlet, and learned discipline. I learned that time is money.
1. Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple wasn't merely a child star, she was a national symbol. She broke through in 1934, became the public face of optimism during the Depression, and for years her image was worth millions. But the financial ending reads like a ledger with the last page torn out. As later historical summaries, including the Library of Congress, have noted, when Temple was 22, she asked her father, who had managed her earnings, how much money she actually had. The answer was a shock. Had $44,000 in a trust fund from roughly $3.4 million she had earned as a child star. That isn't a bad investment. That's an entire childhood converted into a number that doesn't match the work. And what makes Temple's case so chilling is that it doesn't rely on a single melodramatic villain. It's the slow horror of management. Blurred boundaries, adults steering a child's income as if it were family revenue, and a legal culture that didn't treat the child as the real owner. Temple later rejected the stereotype of a classic screaming stage mother, and that nuance matters. Exploitation doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. Sometimes it looks like a parent who assumes the child's money is the family's money, until the child becomes an adult and finally sees the ledger. If Shirley Temple could end up with that arithmetic, the message is brutal. Fame is not financial safety. Sometimes it's just bigger numbers moving through other people's hands. Temple's numbers are quiet horror. Coogan's case became a public scandal, so big it pushed lawmakers to act. 2. Jackie Coogan. Jackie Coogan was one of the first true child superstars. After The Kid, 1921, he wasn't just famous. He was a national phenomenon. Biographical accounts note he entered show business as a toddler, and he quickly became a box office magnet. Then came the part Hollywood didn't advertise: the legal trap. Under the rules of the time, a child's income could legally be treated as the parent's money. Coogan's face was everywhere: films, endorsements, merchandise. And by the time he tried to access what he believed was his fortune, the vault was basically empty. In 1938, Coogan sued his mother and stepfather, accusing them of squandering his earnings. Reporting and later summaries describe that he never recovered anything close to the fortune widely reported at the time, because the legal system then did not clearly treat a child performer's earnings as property the child controlled in the way we'd assume today. Here's the cold arithmetic that turns this into a case file. Coogan later said about $250,000 was all that remained of his childhood earnings, and he received roughly $126,000 after legal fees. The scandal became so notorious, lawmakers had to respond. In 1939, California passed legislation commonly known as the Coogan Law, aimed at preventing a repeat of the Coogan outcome by creating legal safeguards around a minor performer's pay. That law was later revised and strengthened multiple times. In its modern form, the protections are commonly summarized as requiring that a portion of a minor performer's earnings be set aside in a protected, blocked trust account, often described as 15% in a Coogan account. Coogan's tragedy wasn't only personal, it exposed the mechanism. Childhood converted into income, income routed through adults, adulthood greeted by an empty account. And even after that lesson was written into law, the next case proves something worse. Sometimes the theft isn't only money, it's reality itself. 3. Jackie Cooper. Jackie Cooper was one of the most recognizable child stars of 1930s Hollywood. Skippy, the champ, the kind of career that meant constant work and constant income flowing into adult hands. But the most chilling detail in Cooper's story isn't a studio clause. It's a secret routine that ran for years. According to later accounts, Cooper grew up being told his father was dead. Later, he discovered the truth. From 1935 to 1948, his mother had been sending his father, John Cooper, $100 every week, money that Jackie had earned. That's not a one-time theft. That's a long siphon. 13 years of weekly payments totals roughly $67,600 quietly redirected, without the child's consent, without his knowledge, and under a story designed to keep him from asking questions. This is what makes the case hit so hard. The child is working. The household is living. The money is being routed to a man the child is told doesn't exist. It isn't only financial exploitation. It's reality management, a lie engineered to protect a pipeline. But this wasn't a 1930s problem. Years earlier, the same fight was already happening. In court, in ink, and in numbers. 4. Mary Miles Minter. Mary Miles Minter wasn't just a young star. She was a working child. She began performing on stage at age 5, and by 1912 she was already appearing in films. By the time the silent era crowned her a sensation, the money didn't flow toward the child. It flowed toward the adults around her. And then it turned into paperwork. Cold, formal, undeniable. In 1925, Minter sued her own mother, Charlotte Shelby, demanding an accounting, a court-level demand to open the ledger and explain what happened to the money Shelby had received on her behalf. Contemporary reporting framed the dispute with a brutal number. Minter sought an accounting of $1,300,000 she alleged had been paid under contract, money that had moved through adult hands while she was still young enough to have no control over it. The ending is as documentary as a stamp on paper. The dispute was settled out of court, with the settlement signed on January 24, 1927, at the American Consulate in Paris. Not a Hollywood premiere, not a family reconciliation, a legal document finalized overseas. And the financial pressure around Shelby didn't end there. Records later describe her own separate brokerage dispute ending in a settlement. Evidence of how quickly earnings and investments could become adult battlegrounds around a child's labor. In the next case, the word guardian stops meaning protection and starts meaning ownership. 5. Daisy and Violet Hilton. Daisy and Violet Hilton were born February 5, 1908, conjoined twins turned into public spectacle. Their lives were shaped by adults who recognized a harsh truth. The public would pay, and the children had no power to refuse. This is not a story about bad budgeting. It's about guardianship used as a business license. Historical accounts describe years of control that functioned like ownership, punishment, confinement, and earnings collected by the adults managing them. In their case, the pay didn't follow the performers, it followed the handlers. The twins were the product, the guardians owned the pipeline. That's what makes 1931 matter. By then, they were adults in age, but not in freedom. They sued their managers and won emancipation from the contract, often described as a legal liberation, and they were received around $100,000 as compensation tied to that wrongdoing. But emancipation doesn't refund a childhood. It doesn't restore the years of earnings routed away while they were kept working. Their case expands your theme in the harshest way. Sometimes the theft isn't hidden behind family language at all. Sometimes it's formalized, and the performers only get what's left of their own lives. Then comes the assembly line, where nobody steals in one night. They just drain a childhood, year by year. 6. Baby Peggy, Diana Sarah Carey. Diana Sarah Carey, known to the world as Baby Peggy, began working so early it sounds unreal. She was 19 months old when she first appeared on film in 1921. Within only a few years, she had made around 150 short films, less a childhood than a production schedule. The publicity machine loved numbers because numbers sound like proof. Accounts describe that by 1922, she was said to have received about 1.2 million fan letters. By 1923-1924, she was billed as the $1 Million Baby, and publicity claims tied her to earnings on the scale of $1.5 million a year, figures often repeated as part of the era's hype, whether or not they reflect precise payroll. But the real story isn't the headline. It's the ownership. The work was hers. The money wasn't. Contracts, tours, appearance fees, everything ran through adult hands while she lived on a token allowance, a child doing the labor without touching the wages. And then comes the part that makes it belong in this video. When the work stopped, the money didn't wait. It was already gone, absorbed into the adult world, living off her name. No protected reserve. No adult life funded by the childhood that paid for everyone else. The spotlight cooled, and the million-dollar legend collapsed into the same ending. A child treated like a revenue stream, and an adult left with nothing that matches the labor. But in the next case, the child doesn't only grow up and find the money missing, she grows up and finds her entire origin story split open. 7. Baby Marie Osborne. Baby Marie Osborne was a major child star of early American cinema, one of those silent-era careers that reads like a production ledger instead of a childhood. She was born November 5, 1911, and in later recollections, she described being taken in very young and raised by foster adoptive parents, an origin story that already places her life in adult hands long before she could consent to anything. By 1915, she was already being discovered at Balboa Studios. By 1916, director Henry King had built Little Mary Sunshine around her as a starring vehicle. She appeared in 29 films across roughly 5 to 6 years as a child, an assembly line pace. And the era's publicity machine attached a price tag. A January 17, 1918 newspaper story billed her as the $1,000 a week movie star. Even allowing for promotional inflation, it's a rare period number that shows how the industry framed her value. Then the structure tightened around her. After Baby Marie's Balboa contract expired in 1917, accounts describe her foster parents and a partner taking over a studio in Glendale, renaming it D'Ando Studios, to make pictures starring her, meaning the child remained the product and the adults owned the pipeline. Her glory days ended fast. Her final child star film is widely identified as the 1919 short Miss Gingersnap. And here is her own later recollection, reported in interviews and obituaries. There was a trust fund, but I never seemed to have received anything. Not rumor, the grown child looking back at the supposed protection and describing an empty result. Now, before we cross into the modern era, one last classic era case adds a different angle. Sometimes it wasn't the parents who emptied the account. Sometimes it was the adult gatekeepers they trusted to manage it. 8. Gloria Jean. Gloria Jean's case needs one clear caveat. This isn't a neat "parents stole the money" headline. Here, the money didn't vanish through a stereotypical stage mother story. It vanished through adults managing her finances, including the family's lawyer. Gloria Jean was a major child singer-actress of the late 1930s and early 1940s, rising at Universal during the classic studio era. By 1941, she was visible enough to co-star with W.C. Fields in Never Give a Sucker an Even Break, a signal that she wasn't background noise. She was a marketed asset. Then the paper trail starts showing stress cracks. In December 1940, reports describe that she and her parents were sued by a man described as her former agent, with coverage framing the demand at $500,000 to $25,000. That number matters. It tells you how much money people believed was moving around this child's name, and how quickly that money attracted claims, fees, and adult hands. By December 1944, Gloria Jean left Universal, and her agent arranged personal appearance tours across the U.S. and Europe. When she returned, later accounts described the story turning ugly in the most financial crime scene way possible. The family's lawyer allegedly disappeared with her earnings. Not mismanaged, not spent on the household, just gone. That's what this case adds to the dossier. A child can be famous, booked, and profitable, yet still have zero control over the adults holding the ledger. And this is the point where people say, that was the old studio era, one bad time, one bad system. The truth is uglier. Protections were added, accounts were locked, yet the same story kept repeating. The paperwork changed, the incentive didn't. 9. Gary Coleman. Now jump forward to television fame. Different era, same trap. Gary Coleman became a household name and earned heavily as a minor. Even after decades of warnings, he still ended up in court against the people entrusted with his money. Coleman sued his adoptive parents and his former manager, business advisor, accusing them of taking too much and mishandling his assets. This story produced a blunt, documentary-grade finding. In February 1993, a judge ruled that Coleman's parents and manager wrongfully took $1.28 million through excessive commissions, salaries, fees, and pension contributions. That wording matters. It isn't vague family spending. It's a judicial finding that a child star's earnings were treated like a reservoir adults could tap, through professional-sounding channels that look legitimate until a judge adds them up. And then, in October 1993, Coleman announced a settlement, closing one chapter of a war no former child should have to fight just to reclaim wages. One more modern case seals the point. Even when the industry changes, the oldest temptation stays the same. Follow the money. 10. Leann Rimes. In May 2000, Leann Rimes was 17 when she and her mother filed suit in Dallas, alleging that more than $7 million of her income had been taken. Reporting described the claim as involving money diverted from her earnings and from a company formed in 1995 to manage her finances, meaning this wasn't one missing paycheck. It was a structure built around a minor's revenue. The conflict escalated publicly. By December 2000, her father filed a countersuit, turning a family money dispute into open legal warfare. And on March 2001, Rimes settled with her former co-manager, a reminder that even when you win, the paper often ends in silence, confidentiality, or terms the public never sees. Here's the brutal point. The era changed. Contracts got cleaner, laws got louder, and still, a teenager could be famous enough to sell out arenas while fighting adults in court over where the money went. These weren't just child stars. They were children doing adult labor, while adults held the ledger. And when the cameras moved on, too many of them learned the same last line, over and over. There's nothing left.